Ask any cloud engineer and they'll tell you. APIs are the new gateways to innovation. As such, API management is now a top concern for CxOs everywhere. To use these tools effectively, companies must employ a multifaceted approach that takes into consideration security, performance, reliability, scalability. Learn more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Today's topic is going to talk about how you can really leverage the power available today through the cloud. We're going to talk about APIs, application program interfaces. APIs are the gateways to innovation. They're the gateways to data. We're going to find out they're gateways to functionality too. It's not just data that's flying across those little transoms. It's also instructions of how to do things. So on both sides, whether it's on the API side or the side accessing the API, well, what you want to do is really understand how these APIs work, and they're all a little bit different. I've been told that DigitalOcean is the best API. That's what my developer friends tell me. But APIs, they are super important. They're like faucets or spigots, right? So if you think about a faucet, you turn on the faucet to get water, you turn off the faucet to stop the flow of the water. APIs are kind of like that for data and for instruction, basically. You turn them on, you get something from it, you turn it off. Well, you can imagine that they're very important. It's a very important part of your architecture these days as we move into this hybrid cloud world, which I think is going to be the reality for quite some time. They become very important. So architecturally, you want to think about stuff. Before the show here, we were chit-chatting about design and how I'm so proud of my daughter for being a big Pirates fan. We're here in Pittsburgh. She loves going to the games, and it's a beautiful venue because the urban planners really thought about stuff. All the seats in some way or other face the outfield, which is the skyline. So you see this beautiful skyline for night games and even day games, of course. But at night, the lights come on. It's just really, really good stuff. So they thought about that. The ingress, the egress, it's all important. And we have several guests for you today. We're going to be hearing from Lori MacVittie of F5, David Linthicum of Deloitte, and our good buddy Matt McLarty from Boomi. And with that, let's bring in our first guest, Lori MacVittie. You've been doing this stuff for a while now, 17 plus years at F5. And you've really made a name for yourself and helped evangelize the importance of architectural choices and design choices. So tell us a bit about yourself and what you do. What you're doing in the space of APIs today.
Wow. Well, thanks for having me. Like you said, I've been with F5 for 17 years. I've been doing a lot of evangelism through all of it. I'm at this point, I'm a distinguished engineer. So now I just give my opinion about things, which is kind of fun. I try to be right. And APIs is huge because it touches everything from automation, right? We do app delivery and security. So how do you automate that? How do you let people automate that? How do you integrate with people who want to automate it, right? APIs are the answer. So there's APIs in use as, right, business, right? How do we make all of this possible? And then how do you secure and deliver APIs? Because, right, APIs are something that people use to do those same things in the wild. So, I spend a lot of time looking at the market, looking at the technologies and how they're being impacted by APIs and vice versa. And, again, I give my opinion. So
yeah, well, let's get your opinion on a couple interesting topics here. So we were talking before the show about the history, about SOAP versus REST, for example, and the WSDL folks, the W3C folks years ago are saying you should use SOAP. So people said, we're going to go ahead and use REST. And then new things come along, Kafka, Apache Kafka, and streaming technologies. And that, to me, not to get too far off topic, but when I think about streaming architectures and Kafka, and of course, there's Red Panda as another one, and there's a few others out there. Red Panda, I think, rewrote Kafka in C++, I think is what they did, because they said they wanted to be more efficient. So they went out and they did that. There's Pulsar, there's Flink, there are other services. But to me, again, this could come through an API, right? As this data is channeling into your organization, these streaming architectures, I think, are fantastic, but they're really seemingly only good for net new use cases because there is this sort of mismatch in terms of how they operate versus how the rest of your stack operates. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that and the evolution of design for APIs and design and management.
Wow. So yes, streaming data very different than right how we normally think about accessing a record, right? It's
Hmm.
right real time versus transactional, right? And those are very different data types. They're very different traffic patterns. So
Right.
the way that you have to access them is going to be very different, and you design differently for that. But the rise of streaming data and kind of the rise of the awareness of data that hey, that's what we want. That's why applications exist, is just to get at data for us, has kind of made it, can we get the data closer to the user? And APIs are doing that, right? You mentioned new things. GraphQL is rising in part to do that, right? It's a more direct way to access data as well as federate other APIs, which is great. But really, it's about getting closer to the data and making sure that that happens faster. So when you're designing, you have to think about things like, what kind of data am I going to be delivering? Is it going to be, real time? Does it need to be constantly updated? Is it just a record in time? How fast do people need it? Is it going to an application or directly to a client? Is it going to someone else? Is it a third party? Right? What is the use for that data? That kind of drives a lot of the design of the API.
Yeah. And so when I think about how big a deal this is for the hybrid cloud world, I mean, you're always trying to optimize performance, right? If you get right down to brass tacks, there are lots of ways you can do things. And what you want to do is be able to optimize performance and really give yourself a fighting chance to live in a fast evolving world. I think that's probably the real kicker these days. What did I hear? We had John Santaferraro on a couple of weeks ago, and he goes, agile is going to kill, or agility is going to kill agile. I was like, what? I didn't think about it. His point was, yeah, this agile stuff, that's great, but you need to be really agile. Like in your business, and your architecture needs to be designed to support that kind of thing. APIs play a big role here. In your opinion, how big a role do they play? And what can a company do to enable themselves to get this agility?
Wow, breathe first, right? Right. I think we have to go back and remember that, as far as, like an enterprise goes, right? The enterprise architecture is the technical representation of the business.
Right.
And as we've gotten more and more digital, those two things have come closer together. So APIs and are really, I like to call them layer 8 on the stack, right? They're the business layer. They are really describing your business and how you're going to interface with it. So that's a huge thing, that you have to actually talk to the business people, and the business people have to understand, right? The technology is not just an afterthought. They have to be designed together. So they need to come together and design that in a very deliberate and thoughtful way, right? While also thinking about how might someone abuse that? Because the other thing we do is expose this to everyone, to partners, to the public, to random people, right, that we met. Hey, use our API. That's
Right.
nice. How might they abuse that? Because
Right.
they will.
Right. No, that's right. So that gets into the whole security issue. Let's talk about that, and then I'll bring in our next guest. But as soon as I started researching for this program, in my mind was that exact question. It's like, okay, if this is your new entry point for requests to serve your prospects, your customers, your high value customers, or your freebie customers, whatever, well, lots of people are going to be trying to come in that door, and lots of little tricks, like, over the years, SQL injection is a real problem for organizations. Phishing attempts through email, like there are bad guys everywhere these days, and they love to get creative about to sneak into your environment. And I've thought to myself over the years, wouldn't it be possible to sneak in through the API? Talk about security and what you do to secure your APIs.
Well, yes, they do. And I think I've read multiple reports from many different, right, across the market. And yeah, APIs are like the number one way that people are attacking, right? Because it's a programmatic interface, which implies not just me, right? I actually need something, an app, my mobile phone. I need something to interact with that API. But programmatically, someone can write a script that just click, 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 right, is accessing that API. It's designed for that, in fact.
Right.
So you see things like, right, we're just going to send 1 million bots against you, right? To do
Right.
something,
Right.
right? Might,
Sure.
yeah, take over an account, take down your business, buy all your sneakers or all of your Xboxes before Christmas,
Right.
right? All of these are things that bots have done. They've leveraged APIs to do that. So they're a great way for us to access it, but that also means that attackers are going to use it too, and they do.
Yeah. And so watching, I mean, sitting there, getting observability into what your APIs are doing is obviously very, very important. I'm sure what you see, because they have to log in and say, oh, here's me, I'm XYZ request. Could you please give me some stuff? Here's me, I'm ABC request. Please give me some stuff. Like that's a critical part of the process is as it comes in, like, do I like you? Are you okay? Or should I shut you off? So I'm guessing you create blacklists, right, for people who come in, and they usually do it by proxy too, so it's hard to keep track of them. But is that one of the tricks that you use, is to kind of set up a list of troublemakers and say, nope, don't let them in. If they come in from that address, no, we know the neighbors, we don't want them.
That's, you can do that, but the list would get so big because most of the attackers are they're using machines that they've compromised or bot farms. So the market's advanced to doing more advanced bot detection, which involves behavior, right? How are they interacting with this API? What are they doing? What are the technical signatures that we can see inside of the data that they're sending? Inside the network information they're sending. So observability is huge because you have to see the network characteristics, the TCP stack, and then the actual requests that they're making in order to kind of form a picture of, is this a bot I don't like, or is this a valid user?
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, let's bring in our next guest. We've got David Linthicum of Deloitte waiting patiently in the wings out there. So David, you've been a cloud expert for decades. You've been tracking this stuff for a long, long time. We even joked in the pre-call about how you wrote the book on EAI. I remember that enterprise application integration, right? When we do a lot of point-to-point stuff, now you got Kubernetes, which is sort of a de facto foundational component that's changing things up. But tell us the latest that you've seen about APIs and API management and what you think folks should do.
Yeah, APIs are becoming everything in terms of how you manage infrastructure. And so certainly in the clouds, we've always been accessing resources in the clouds via well-defined APIs. At least that's the way we should have done it. Now that we're getting into a multi-cloud deployment, and you mentioned hybrid cloud, and we're trying to mix that up with our existing on-premise systems, by the way, throw in edge computing, and by the way, throw in all the net new AI systems that have come online in the last couple of years, we have a complexity issue. And the ability to mediate this complexity typically means that we're getting at these various systems through very similar interfaces that are able to operate across resources. And so APIs become everything because it provides us with the ability to abstract those resources down into common layers that we're able to access as bunches of services, knowledge engines, as behaviors, as application data, things like that. That's able to reduce the amount of complexity and increase the agility of the business, the ability to orchestrate and re-orchestrate business processes to align directly to the business needs versus building everything as a one-off application development project that occurs within a particular cloud provider.
Right.
That solves a tactical problem. It doesn't solve the strategic, I think, fundamental issues that people are running into today. There's too many moving parts out there. We went from like 3,000 services under management to 10,000 services under management. The ability to combine those into common APIs, the ability to manage and secure them through a single interface layer is really kind of the way to go. It's the only way we're going to make cloud scale.
That's a great quote right there. I should write that down. The only way we're going to make cloud scale is to be more responsible and thoughtful in the design and management of APIs, is what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. And we've kind of lost that as a talent. We know how to leverage APIs. We know how to leverage microservices. We know how to build and deploy services. But as far as how we design these properly, and dealing with, Lori just mentioned it, the ability to have different API patterns that serve different purposes, streaming data, the ability to have information that's produced through APIs, and also the ability for APIs to produce behavior, the ability to have them act upon things and act upon data and be able to reuse those from domain to domain to domain seems to be some kind of a lost art. And we had the rise of service-oriented architecture years ago, and everybody thought they were going to get really good at, leveraging, orchestrating these services into reuse and common sets of systems. That hasn't really happened. And we're not putting reuse into thinking how we're design and deploy these APIs, which has to be on the critical path.
Our next guest has been focused on the future for a long time. He's been looking down the barrel of the future, trying to figure out, all right, how can we plan for this? How can we get around this? How can we leverage these amazing opportunities coming through the cloud? And that is Matt McLarty from Boomi. So Matt, I think you were the one who mentioned on our show about a month ago, the amount of metadata that Boomi has, because you've been doing this for a long time. And instructions are, who out there really likes to follow instructions, right? Let me go ahead and get the manual out. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. Thank goodness for YouTube, right? Just like putting stuff together. If you find the video of someone who can just show you how to do it, that's a real example of my favorite Wittgenstein quote when he said, "Some things cannot be said, they must be shown." And if you show someone how to do something, oh my God, as opposed to those diagrams, those like 3D diagrams that they try to show you, and like, is this the back? Is that the front? Is that the screw that goes in here? Like, what? Reading that documentation is just such a pain. Writing documentation is a pain. Of course, now we have large language models that can absorb massive amounts of documentation and give us some information about it. That's pretty cool. But with all that as a background, Matt, I'll throw it over to you. What's the latest in API management, and how is Boomi making lives easier?
Yeah, I think no, great points. In fact, I would say that when it comes to API management, I don't think there's any way to ignore the age that we're in now. You're talking about the future and looking down the future. It's like the future hit us pretty hard this year with AI all of a sudden exploding onto the scene.
Wow.
So I've been spending a lot of time kind of thinking through, where does AI leave the API space, right? And I think you just mentioned the example there of large language models coming up with succinct summaries of things, which is great if they're accurate. They're not always accurate, right? So we're at a real point now of sort of an impedance mismatch between the level of hype and the level of energy and excitement around AI, and just how ready the technology is for prime time, but also how ready organizations are able to take advantage of the technology. So a lot of the companies I'm working with now are like, yeah, our CEO is telling us you need an AI strategy now. Like we need to do something right now. But the fact of the matter is, being ready to fully leverage the whole AI opportunity is something that takes time. And so you mentioned our experience at Boomi, where we've got this metadata that takes years to build up, and lots of analysis and understanding and curation, and ultimately we have a good base to work from when it comes to making recommendations and doing things in the API management space. But not everybody has that. So I think AI is going to have a huge effect on every technology area. When it comes to APIs, I think that there's a lot of ways that AI is going to impact APIs, and how APIs are going to impact the way people use AI. So like first and foremost, like many things in the technology space, how are people going to access these language models? It's going to be via API. That's what they're doing today. I think we as consumers may go out and play around with ChatGPT and have fun typing, but for the large majority of commercial uses of AI technology, it's going to be integrated into automated processes and behind the scenes into systems of engagement, user experiences. That's all going to be done by API. Right. Prompt engineering is already a term that's out there for like, how do you actually interact effectively with AI models in a way that can give you the results you're looking for? You do prompt engineering. What is the actual medium for prompt engineering? It's APIs for the most part, right? So there's going to be, I think that there's a huge role when we think about API management of how do you regulate the flow of data between your organization and the AI models you're going to be working with. I think it's going to be impractical for most organizations to be taking, trying to build their own LLMs. Like the amount of data and infrastructure you need to do that is untenable for only, it's really only the hyperscale cloud providers and a few others who are going to be able to do that. So much better to focus on how do you protect your data, interact with these things effectively. And a lot of that comes down to just working with your own data, governing your own data, cleaning your data, and providing the right context. So I think, historically in the API management space, a lot of the focus has been on providers. Like when we, I've been in the API management business a long time. It's a lot of companies who are saying, hey, we've got stuff, we want to turn it into APIs. We need API management. I think you're going to see a whole new category of API management that's required, where companies are going to say, well, we're going to be consuming all these APIs. We don't want our developers just going off and plugging into every API that's out there in the ecosystem. We need to have governance around that. We need to ensure that we've got data privacy protected. We need to regulate the flow of traffic so that we're protecting quality of service in our systems. So I think that's going to sort of invert the perspective on what type of API management is needed. There's going to be a lot more consumption of APIs in a smaller number of players, and that's going to require a whole new brand of API management.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good prediction. Quite frankly, you think about the importance of leaning on these spigots, these faucets to get your water. I mean, think about how in some older houses, if you're in the shower and someone flushes the toilet or someone turns the washing machine on downstairs, all of a sudden cold water, hot water gets cold, you're like, oh no, stand out of the way is the rule of thumb. Just step out of the way and walk. Old buildings in New York City are terrible about that. And that kind of thing, I mean, you have to be sitting there watching the data that's going out. What is the stress on this system? How can we bolster on the back end to be able to handle all this stuff? And how do you manage? How do you throttle low value requests? And how do you, enable high value requests to get through? Are those just business rules or something that get impacted and you sense who's coming in? Oh, sorry, you're in the low tier. I'd imagine that's a piece of metadata on the top of that request that's coming through. It's like, okay, wait a second. And then when the big train goes through that paid a lot of money, then you get your stuff. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think to David's point earlier about design, right? I think that people, not only are they not necessarily designing their APIs to be developer friendly just from a sort of structuring the messages and the data, but you really need to think about the design of APIs from a quality of service perspective. Like that's a good analogy is these buildings in New York or shared accommodations where you've got all this plumbing and other electrical wiring, all that stuff. That's going to be the enterprises. So not only do we have hybrid cloud where companies are thinking about, okay, I'm going to run these workloads in the cloud, I'm going to run these on-prem, I've got edge computing, like all these things going on. They now are depending on fundamental services from third parties. They're already doing that for cloud infrastructure. I think a lot of organizations don't even realize just how dependent they are on API-based services as it is.
Yeah.
So they might understand that they've got sprawl when it comes to relying on SaaS applications. They've got sprawl when it comes to relying on APIs already. Mm-hmm. And so I think that and to Lori's point about layer 8, the business layer of your infrastructure, if you think about that, like APIs allow you to have a more normalized view of what that looks like. But from there, there's a lot of paths down into what is actually providing that layer. And so when you think about that perspective of I'm now a consumer of these APIs, which are themselves consumers of other APIs, having that understanding, having that observability and governance around it is crucial. And just one other thing on the AI front that sort of relates back to this is I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity. I am both an optimist and also as a veteran of the industry, I can be a bit cynical about this. Like there's an opportunity there where organizations can rely on APIs, not only as places where they provide data, but as places where they collect data. Like you're going to get you have the opportunity to collect incredible amounts of contextual information about your business. If this is your business layer, not only are you servicing whoever the consumers of these APIs are, you're also at that point of consumption, you understand context. It's not like it's just like somebody walking into a store using a credit card and you see a purchase. Like you've got the full context and the digital footprint of people using these APIs. The more you're able to capture that context at the point of consumption of the APIs, you can feed that back into your systems of intelligence and create this feedback loop where now you have more and more refined contextual information. You can use that to generate more valuable insights, which can be fed back in and so on, and create sort of this flywheel effect. But that's the possibility. A lot of organizations still need to crawl, walk before they run.
Yeah, right. Lori, I'll bring you back in since Matt was kind enough to reference you here. And I'm thinking, and I love this concept, because we're going to do a show on observability later this week. And Lori MacVittie, I'll throw this over to you. To me, observability really should feed design, because when you can see what is being requested of your systems, then you can better understand how to optimize those systems. We put some extra, oomph behind this particular data store or that particular data store because that's what people seem to be wanting. To me, that makes a lot of sense to kind of watch the ingress, the egress, what's coming in, what's going out. There have to be clues in there about how to optimize your design and evolve your design. What do you think, Lori?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it feeds both the business and technical decisions, right? On the business side, if you have that context like Matt was describing, you can also ascribe it to a customer, and you can look at buying patterns and habits and interactions and say, wow, they're not engaging. Maybe it's because the performance they're experiencing is really terrible, right? So maybe we should do something about that. You can address it from a human element, but on the technical side, it's also, well, why, right? Oh, because they moved to this remote location. Wow, well, maybe there's an edge location where we can actually make sure that part of the system is there so everyone there is getting better performance, and actually start making decisions about where you distribute your front end, your data, right? Put your security in a different place, right? What is impacting the performance? Is it just a bad switch somewhere, right? Go in the closet, switch it out, yeah, get a new one. Or is it a distribution problem? Is it a design problem, right? Is this one API just pulling like too much data? Did you need all of that? Or did you just need a few things, right? I mean, deliberate, thoughtful, right? David touched on this, right? You have to actually think about the design, right? From a security standpoint, it's imperative. Don't give out more than you need to, because that impacts performance, and it's also a security risk. So, you got to approach it more strategically and more deliberately when you design the APIs. Only then, right, are you going to be able to feed that observability in and start understanding the impact and get into that, virtuous cycle of design and data, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And David, I'll bring you back in. I remember learning about code bloat about 20 odd years ago. One of the developers at a company called Damon Consulting, where I was the communications guy, he used that term code bloat. I was like, code bloat, what does that mean? He goes, well, basically what happened is when the processors got really fast, the developers got lazy, because you used to have to be real refined and very assiduous in your choice of code, of functions, and how you layered them, how you strung them together. And then when the processors got fast, who cares? We just do it and whatever we want. And that created bulky, inefficient code. Like my favorite example to pick on is Microsoft from years ago. If you were to go into Microsoft Word and write hello world and then do save as HTML and then open that document in a text editor, it was like 4 pages long. I'm like, okay, I don't think I needed all those meta tags, Microsoft. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. But that was a bit of overkill, to use Lori's term. But what do you think about all that, David?
Yeah, I think it's spot on thinking. I mean, the reality is we're seeing code bloat today around AI-based systems that are built around developments. In other words, using autocoders and things like that are becoming very inefficient ways to do things that are fairly simple. We're making simple things complex.
Right.
So as we move forward, the ability to see the span of what these APIs are doing, you just kind of hit the whole observability piece, which I think is spot on. It's about looking at something in more than a single dimension. And so Lori's example with the ability to link performance into customer interaction, link to revenue, and link to industrial behavior, and link that into the future vision of the product, and all these sorts of things that people typically don't think about. Your ability to understand API design and how you build APIs and deploy APIs and secure APIs in the context of all that information really kind of is the secret here.